And so like both sides are always in a position where they feel like they've given as much as they can, and then you run into a position where they might stand their foot firmly in the ground and say, we're not budging anymore. Not because we don't think that this is a reasonable offer, a reasonable request, but because this particular person has upset us so much that we don't want to go through with this anymore. That's a very real possibility, right? And when those things happen, sometimes it's too far gone. Sometimes we can still hold the deal together. But again, I have seen it work out in both ways. I've seen deals fall apart over just the most minute of details, where it was like, in the grand scheme of things, this should not have mattered, right? In a vacuum, that amount of money or that difference between what the buyer wanted and what the seller wanted was so small that it really should not have killed that deal, that transaction. But it happens all the time because, again, emotions come into play, right? Welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home, where we offer expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. In this week's episode, we'll be discussing emotions and escrows, how feelings can influence real estate deals. It is one of the most underestimated aspects of a real estate transaction that kind of finds a way to sneak into every kind of deal that we have. I really don't think people understand just how much emotions can play a deal. You might see a transaction or a home sell for a certain price or have certain closing costs, and you're like, how in the world did that happen? Or how did that go into it? And you would be surprised how much feelings can play a role, right? Or you might see a deal that fell through and you're like, that must have been something that happened, whatever, not even realizing how feelings kind of seep their way into that transaction and kill that entire deal. So I wanted to take a time to, just talk about certain ways that feelings can kind of work their way into a real estate deal, and how you as a buyer can prepare yourself to make sure that you don't allow feelings to push you over the edge or to make decisions that aren't necessarily in your best interest. It's going to sound like, oh, well, what's the point of doing this? But again, I truly think that people don't understand just how much of a deal it is and how much it can really impact the way that a transaction works out. And so we're going to talk through some of those key discussion points and kind of go through some of the ways that I have seen feelings influence a lot of deals that I've been in, and ways that I try to kind of combat that or work against it in certain circumstances. When you look at a residential real estate deal, it's tied very much to your home. That's going to be your anchor in many cases for what you're doing from day to day. It kind of ties into your identity, the security that you feel, the memories that you share, a lot of your major life transitions. We think about when you get married or when you have kids, when you get divorced, all these different things that are happening in people's lives all center around where they're living, what they're doing in those places. Dictates the friendships that you create, where your key friendships or key people that you have in your life will kind of come into your life. A lot of that features around where you live and where you lay your head at night. And so it is understandable why so many people would have so many emotions tied into that particular home or that particular house. And then once you remove the kind of the feelings and the emotions from just where you're going to be living every night, you also have to consider that when you're purchasing a home, that's also one of the largest financial decisions that you're going to make in that time. And so those are two massive things that you have working almost against one another in a case. And it's very difficult for you to make sound, rational, logical decisions for your finances and also do something that's going to have a very real impact on your day-to-day life, and wondering whether or not you're making the right decision. Are you making mistakes? Are there things that you didn't take into consideration, right? All those things are coming together. I think about myself. I have served on a board of directors for our local association. And when we first join onto that board, before we have our very first meeting, they have us sign a statement which basically says if there's any conflict of interest with something that we're about to take a vote on, we will agree to automatically recuse ourselves and remove ourselves from that vote to make sure that there's no conflict of interest, right? If they're voting on who we're going to get to do, I don't know, the landscaping or something in the building, if the person that they're quoting just happens to be a relative of mine, right, that's an obvious conflict of interest. It's saying that, hey, if that were to happen, you would automatically remove yourself from that situation. That way there would be no appearances of conflict of interest. And really that's to make sure that emotions kind of don't sway your opinion in certain cases, right? You may think, oh, well, I can look at things objectively and I'm not going to allow emotions to get in there too, but you have to kind of put those safeguards and those railings in place for yourself. And it's very similar to the way that real estate transactions go, that you have to prepare yourself for the fact that you may not be in the best position to make all of those decisions or to think rationally. And that's where your realtor is really going to come into play and really help you in those situations. I know a lot of realtors who have sold their own personal home and they hired a realtor to help them through the process because they knew going into it, there's no way I'm going to be able to completely remove myself from this decision emotionally before going into it. And I want a buffer in place to kind of make sure that I'm not getting too involved and not letting my emotions get the best of me and do something that hinders or stops this deal from being able to take place or keeps this transition from working smoothly. You have to understand, again, there's going to be an obvious conflict of interest in you making this massive financial decision, but also a place that you're going to be calling home every night, right? And so that's where those are things that you need to keep in mind right out of the gate and understand how to do it. Now, there are times where the emotional side of real estate can help you through the process. I've talked about this before, but buying, the actual act of buying a house, going through escrow, doing the loan application, the appraisals, the inspections, it is a miserable experience. I don't want to mince words or make you think, oh, it's not that bad. It's not that. There's a reason. There's a part of the home buying process that they don't reference in most HGTVs and house hunters, right? They love talking about looking for the house and doing the negotiations to get the home under contract, but all that long, tedious stuff that happens after that to actually get the home to closing, the stuff that takes 30 to 45 days, they don't really go into detail with that because it is a long, tedious, boring, just monotonous process that is painful and expensive and annoying and any other word that you can think of that you don't want to deal with, right? And so in order for people to have the motivation and the will and the encouragement to actually go through that process, they need to have something that helps encourage and give them hope, right? And so the emotional side of seeing that home and envisioning yourself living in that home, that is what gives a buyer the motivation to actually push through. Because again, like I said, it is not a fun time once you're actually under contract on that house. And so you need something that's going to help push you through. And so that emotional attachment is going to play a bigger role than anything else. Now, we've said for years, one of the biggest reasons or the number one reasons that a real estate deal falls apart is because of issues with financing. But I would take it a step further, and I believe that the number one reason, even above that, is emotions, right? If your motivation and your emotions for that deal are not strong enough, it's not going to work out, right? I've seen that kill more deals than anything else out there, right? Because if you could also make the case that if you were truly motivated and really encouraged and had a strong emotional tie to that house, you would make sure that you had all your ducks in a row from the jump, and it would be less likely to have financing issues. Like a lot of times the financing issues are things that could have been avoided if the buyer had done all the appropriate steps beforehand before getting that house under contract. There's a lot of times where buyers kind of, I don't want to say lie, but they might hold things back from or not tell the lender the entire story of their finances because they'll just want to see how things play out. But again, if you truly and honestly want that home and you want that deal to work out, you're going to cross all your T's, dot all your I's, make sure that you have professionals in your corner, that you've vetted everyone who's helping you out to make sure that you have the best resources available. And so again, emotions play a strong part in you being able to make that deal happen. The sellers, they're even going to feel a sense of pride being able to hand this house off to the next person, right? They want to send it off to someone who they know will enjoy living in that house and treasure living in that home as well, because they likely have emotional ties to it too. The average person is only going to stay there about 5 to 7 years. However, you can definitely build a strong attachment to a home and build some wonderful memories, even in that short amount of time span. And so they want to be able to have it handed off to someone else who's going to enjoy it too. And so that can play a factor in the negotiations as well. And then you also need that ability for a buyer to envision themselves living in the home. That's one of the key factors that often gets left out, is that the buyer really truly needs to see themselves live. That's why a lot of times we'll advise the sellers to remove a lot of their personal photos and make that house a blank slate, because that buyer really needs to have that strong emotional tie to deal with all the other crap that's going to have to come with purchasing that house. And so they need to have that emotion in place. And that emotion, if it's strong enough, it will push them and propel them forward through all kinds of obstacles that may pop up during the deal, right? Like I said, if it's one thing after another, right? Like if you got appraisal issues and inspection issues and all these other things that are popping up in the deal, they're completely normal things that happen throughout the course of a transaction. But if you don't have that strong emotional tie, there's a good chance you're likely going to see those things as, hey, maybe this is a sign I shouldn't go through with this sale, or maybe this is a sign that things just aren't meant to be, or just aren't in the cards, and you're willing to throw your hands up a lot faster in those cases. And so emotions really can help propel people through the process. And so I personally am looking for clues. When I see that offer, I'm looking for clues that that buyer has a strong emotional tie to the house, right? Like I said, how much money are they willing to put down up front? Do they have all the things organized with their offer? Do they have a qualified lender that they've already talked to, given all their documents and paperwork and everything like that? When we're going through negotiations and they're responding or they're putting together paperwork, does it take them forever and a day to send back the paperwork that you requested, or to respond to a counteroffer? All these different things I'm looking at to see, is this person truly motivated, and do they have a tie to this house? Do they really want this home? Because that is going to play a far more important factor than anything else that's written on that contract. There's no way for us to tell. There's no like checkbox on the offer to purchase that says, hey, how motivated or how attached to this home are you from 1 to 10? There's nothing like that on there. So we really have to look at any clue possible for us to be able to tell whether or not the person truly and honestly wants this deal to work out. Now, emotions can obviously hurt the deal as well. It's not always a good thing. There can be a lot of things where you're trying to combat those negative emotions before it ever even reaches that process, right? So buyers can become almost too attached to a certain home, and that could lead them to overbid or waive certain protections, right? They may enter the deal and say, hey, we'll get rid of inspections. We'll get rid of appraisals. These are things that we were seeing a few years ago when the market was truly crazy, and things have calmed down a little bit more right now. But every now and then you're still going to run into situations where a buyer sees a home that's sort of a unicorn hit the market, and they're willing to throw caution to the wind and get rid of all logic and reason to get this house under contract, only to find out years down the road that they way overpaid, or that they ignored certain warning signs that they should have kept in mind. Again, I always tell people there's no such thing as a perfect house. And if you think you found the perfect house, live there for a couple of years, and I guarantee you won't feel that way anymore. There's always something that people want to change, always something that they wish was a little bit different, some things more than others, but there's no house that is going to 100% satisfy all your wants and desires in a home all the time, right? You're constantly evolving as a person yourself. Your family size or household size may be growing, changing. Their needs may be different. Like there's always going to be something with that house, right? And so you want to make sure that your emotions don't cause you to act too motivated in the deal and cause you to hurt yourself later on down the road. But then also, It can hurt things too when you come into the process with inspection repairs or offers and stuff. A lot of times the sellers are looking at things from trying to figure out, okay, what kind of funds can we get? And they want to maximize their profits, obviously, when they're going through the deal, and they want to make as much money off of that deal as they possibly can to move on to their next dream home that they're looking forward to as well. And so they're always trying to figure out ways to make that work out, right? And the repair negotiations, appraisal negotiations, all these different things that they're trying to work out. And I have seen deals fall apart over a few $100s, right? It's something where it's just a minor inconvenience, but it's just one convenience too many, right? Where it's just like one thing after another, where the parties are starting to get contentious. They're starting to get upset with one another. You know, the seller feels like, well, we gave you a discount on the list price up front, and so you should be willing to help us out in the repair negotiations and not ask for as much. The buyer's thinking, well, we did you a favor by buying your house in the first place when you didn't have any other offers, and now we want to make sure that we get all these things corrected and taken care of. And so, like, both sides are always in a position where they feel like they've given as much as they can, and then you run into a position where they might stand their foot firmly in the ground and say, we're not budging anymore. Not because we don't think that this is a reasonable offer, a reasonable request, but because this particular person has upset us so much that we don't want to go through with this anymore. That's a very real possibility, right? And when those things happen, sometimes it's too far gone. Sometimes we can still hold the deal together. But again, I have seen it work out in both ways. I've seen deals fall apart over just the most minute of details, where it was like, in the grand scheme of things, this should not have mattered, right? In a vacuum, that amount of money or that difference between what the buyer wanted and what the seller wanted was so small that it really should not have killed that deal, that transaction. But it happens all the time because, again, emotions come into play, right? People don't want to feel like they've been gotten over, or that they've been had, or that someone took advantage of them, or quote unquote beat them in the negotiations. They're always looking to kind of get the upper hand in any way that I can, and that can really hinder your situation. So again, that's another wonderful time for your agent to kind of step in as your buffer, right? You really want to have the agents communicating with one another. My dream scenario or dream transaction is one in which the buyer and the seller never talk to each other, never interact with each other. Those are almost always the best transactions because, again, the emotions can come into play and cause those two parties to really butt heads and do things that aren't necessarily in their best interest, right? And so as much as they may want to meet each other and they may want to have that relationship and kind of get to know each other, it very rarely works out, and it's something that we try to avoid, right? You want to have that agent come in as that buffer to make sure that everything stays same and we're all focused on the end goal, which is getting that house sold to the new person so that they can move on, and that the seller has the ability to take their funds and ride off into the sunset. And so that is one thing that the agents are doing. We always joke and say that agents are kind of, we're more than just people who sell houses. We're also therapists and counselors and everything else. And that is because, again, we're oftentimes trying to manage and deal with all these different personalities and different emotions, and working through that and finding ways to make sure that things don't reach to a boiling point and blow over, and then we're left with this shattered deal or transaction. We're always trying to hold things together as best we can and get an option or a resolution that works for both sides. And so that's always in there. But again, emotions can very much hurt a deal. And as an agent, it's often my times to try to predict when that might become an instance and make sure that I can also do my best to keep things in line with my client and showing them like, hey, here's what the ultimate goal is. Let's not allow all the outside noise to kind of come in and change what that is, right? So you want to have that person to kind of bring clarity during those high stakes, high stress moment. It never hurts to take a pause and to take a beat. One benefit to real estate is that it moves a lot slower than a typical transaction, right? And so if you have time, in a lot of cases, you can usually take a night to sleep on it, right? That's something that is a great opportunity for you to just kind of make sure that you're not making any rash decisions. But usually we can buy you a little time. Now, depending on what's going on in the transaction, we may not have a ton of time, but it's usually enough for you to really just take a beat, take a step back, look at the bigger picture and ask yourself like, hey, if I was looking at this particular problem in a vacuum, would that be enough for me to walk away? Or am I allowing outside emotions to hinder or dictate how I feel about that particular item? Right. And so you want to always be looking at and understanding the difference between what's going to happen emotionally versus what is going to help that deal get to that closing table. And then you're also looking at the personal value versus the market value. There are some things that are going to be more important to you in the way that you plan to use that house versus the way that the market dictates or views that home. And it's important that you understand that, right? So I've talked about this in the past with some like upgrades and stuff like that. Like, I love to cook, right? And so a lot of the kitchen amenities and features are going to be more important to me than they would be to most people. And I would be willing to pay a little bit more for a house that offered some of those key features, even if I knew that I wouldn't necessarily be able to get a return on that investment. But the important thing is that I know that going into it. And that's the same way that you need to look at things as well, right? There are going to be features in a home that you may be emotionally tied to and that you may want to have in your own home. And you have to understand that that may not be the way that every other buyer sees it as well. And so you always need to be looking at the house, even though you plan on living there for years to come and creating a life there and building your lifestyle and home, everything else there, you also need to keep in mind that you should always be looking at it in the back of your mind from a resale standpoint as well, and asking yourself, okay, as much as I love this screen porch, or as much as I love this 3-car garage, or as much as I love whatever feature it is, fill in the blank, I have to understand that every other buyer may not view it that same way. And am I prepared for that conversation when it comes time for me to sell? Or am I going to have unrealistic expectations of what a buyer would expect to pay for that particular feature that I am very emotionally tied to, right? Those are very important things for you to keep a hold of. Anytime you're making any changes, improvements, or looking at any key features that a home offers, what is that personal value versus what is your market value on that particular one? And then you also want to be able to make sure that the emotions are always geared in the right direction, right? And so you know yourself better than anybody else. You know what will set you off. You know what's most important to you. And so having that mindset before you ever even set foot in a house is going to do wonders for you in making sure that you are truly in the best position possible. And so I hope that gives you a little bit more to think about. Again, real estate has a ton of different factors and variables that go into making a deal happen. But feelings, if you don't have a firm grasp on how feelings and emotions can really dictate a transaction, you're in for a world of trouble. And so I want to make sure that you always are understanding that you have an agent and a professional in your corner who can help keep things at a calm basis and help you to understand what's really at play here and always get through in that deal. So I hope that that's helpful for you all. As always, I'm here to be a resource and help in any way I can. Have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you next time.